Welcome everyone, and welcome to RVATECH Small Business Monday. I'm Lori Jennings. I'm the owner of Jennings ProSearch, and today I'm going to be talking to Erin Powell, who is the founder of Ginger Juice and is the Director of Lighthouse Labs. I'm so excited. So hopefully I see some people that are entrepreneurs out there who maybe have a side gig, who are looking to maybe go full-time, or you're just curious, you have a great job, and you just have always thought about entrepreneurship. We hope this conversation will be for you. So let's get started with Erin. I'm not going to give a big bio because I'm going to let her walk her through her journey of her career. But I will say she's just an amazing person that I was introduced to a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, and had such a great conversation. I can't believe we've never met before. And, you know, gone to Ginger Juice. Big fan of some of her companies, previous companies, and of course, Lighthouse Labs. So welcome, Erin. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so why don't we start out by giving us the background. Oh, first of all, let me say to everybody, if you want to turn your cameras on, we'd love to see you. And you can ask questions throughout, or you know, chat throughout the session if you want. All right, I just wanted to give everybody that. Start by telling us your journey from when you started out in corporate after graduating from Radford with a BS, right, in public relations, communications, advertising, and then you went on to have a great corporate life before owning your own company. So give us a rundown.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I grew up in a small town in Southwest Virginia, Salem, outside of Roanoke. Went to college at Radford, so coming to Richmond was the big city. And, you know, my first job out of college was working for Bill Royal at Royal and Company. And that was an incredible experience. You know, when I was there, they were doing a lot of recruiting for folks right outside of college. But, you know, we were still able to interact with Bill, you know, on a pretty regular basis. And, you know, for the folks on the phone that know about Royal and Company, you know, when I was there, it was, you know, we were really doing a lot of direct mail for colleges and universities. Of course, now things are much more digital and the company is under new ownership. But that was an incredible experience, really learned a lot. And one of my mentors at Royal had gone through the Interactive Marketing Institute at VCU and learned about Snagajob through that program, and had seen Sean Boyer, who had just raised his Series A round of funding, give a presentation. And so she knew that I had an interest in getting into sales and business development and recommended that I apply. So I applied at Snagajob. I was the 37th person hired. So there was just lots and lots of growth during that time in '06. And for those of you on the phone who might not be familiar with Snagajob, Snagajob is an HR technology company, high growth SaaS company. And when I joined, you know, we were selling directly to companies that hired large hourly workforces. So the client list included companies like Bed Bath & Beyond, Chipotle, Target. And so when I started, there were relationships with companies that were franchised, like Chick-fil-A, Dunkin' Donuts, Papa John's, except for HR and any, you know, hiring related matters, the franchise owners needed to make those decisions instead of corporate. So, you know, at the time I just started calling franchise owners, and it was really uncharted territory for Snagajob. So that was a tremendous opportunity. You know, I was actually able to realize an entire business unit within Snagajob that the company hadn't really, you know, thought about before, decided to focus on. And over the course of my 10-year tenure there, that ended up being kind of the darling child in the sales portfolio. It was a very predictable model. It was, you know, relatively easy to forecast. There were lots of partnership opportunities through different associations that could push deals our way. So that was just an incredible opportunity, one, to realize that market segment. And, you know, if you look at the restaurants in our country, there are about 700,000 of those that are franchised, and that's just on the restaurant side, not to mention the retailers and other, you know, businesses that are franchised. So that was an incredible opportunity. You know, I got to go through a number of mergers and acquisitions at Snagajob, be a part of various different rounds of fundraising, and of course, you know, I reported directly to Sean Boyer, who's the founder and CEO, for most of my tenure there, which was incredible. You know, I got to see a second round of executive leadership that came in. There were multiple remote offices, you know, so got to see that process through, you know, figuring out how to adapt to remote workers and multiple offices, and that was interesting. But really, my passion for franchising was developed there in the early days at Snagajob. And I fell in love with franchising as a business model and felt like it was just a really smart way for people to go into business without being alone. You know, the success rates for franchise businesses are far, far higher than independents, especially in restaurant and retail. And so I just kind of had this dream, you know, cataloged in my mind to start a franchisable business. And so, you know, really that transition from being able to create a business within a business at Snagajob, which was an incredible opportunity, gave me a lot of courage to start Ginger Juice and go out on my own.
Thank you. Those are great companies. That's a great story. I'm sure a lot of us, you know, are wondering what made you take that leap, finally take the leap, because you were pretty high up at Snagajob at that time. You were in executive leadership.
Yeah.
When did you finally, you know, what did it made you go and then just decide to open up Ginger Juice?
Yeah. Well, aside from being crazy, which I think every entrepreneur has a little bit of that in them, you know, really for me, it was, one, having that passion inside that, you know, was driving me to create something on my own. And two, you know, my family suffered a really big tragedy in 2013. My husband passed away suddenly. And, you know, I think when you go through tragic times, you really, you know, it just gives you a different perspective. And for me, that perspective was, you know, life is too short. This is something that I want to do, and I make a lot of decisions based on, you know, what will I regret less? You know, will I regret not doing this, or will I regret doing it? And, you know, ultimately the regret of not doing it wasn't something that I was willing to compromise. So Snagajob was amazing. You know, they let me step down from my leadership role and take on a direct business development role. So at that point, I wasn't responsible for a team, and it allowed me to go and pursue my passion. And, you know, that journey was really interesting. I mean, I didn't have a restaurant background, never worked a day in a restaurant. So, you know, starting a restaurant company without that background, you know, was certainly a challenge. So I spent a lot of time doing R&D. I visited over 50 juice bars, you know, across the United States, you know, and figuring out how to do this and how to build this model. But I think really, you know, what helped me take the leap, because lots of people said, you know, don't take the leap until you can replace your income, you know, all the practical things that, you know, that you should think about when you're going to start a business. And for me, you know, I just felt that was not realistic, you know, and that I wasn't going to be able to take the leap and be able to replace my income right away. And so for me, I had to just get myself in a financial, you know, comfortable place, and ultimately be okay with the risk. And so I ended up doing both for quite some time. So the first brick and mortar location opened in October of 15, and I didn't leave Snagajob until April of 16. So there was a little bit of a safety net there while things kind of got up and running.
Great, thank you. I know it's kind of like that for a lot of people now, and maybe some people around here who find themselves in a position where, you know, COVID has hit them and they're maybe unemployed or they're furloughed, and this gives them that exact, to think about this and to take the risk while they're, yeah.
Well, and that's
It's a
what
good
we're going to
time. I think,
right? I mean, you know, all of these new ideas will come out of times of necessity like right now. So, you know, the folks that are finding themselves unexpectedly in the workforce, this will be the time, right, for all of those ideas to emerge and that creativity, and, you know, for folks to really get brave.
yeah, that's the exciting part.
Yeah.
Just a little bit about what good days and bad days look like, or maybe the risk and rewards that people should know about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, especially at the beginning, and I would still deem Ginger Juice in the beginning, you know, it's still a very, very young company. And in the beginning, there are certainly far more risks. And, you know, I think the reward really comes from taking those moments to look around and recognize the impact of what you've created. I mean, there have been countless times, you know, where I'm standing in my store and, you know, I just have to take a deep breath and look around and say to myself, this didn't exist. You know, we did the same thing at Snagajob. Sean was just amazing about keeping our mission in front of us as a company. And, you know, recognizing the impact that we were having on these hourly workers to help them find work. You know, the same thing at Ginger Juice, recognizing the impact, and really documenting and sharing those stories, because especially at the beginning, that is the reward. You know, it's very unlikely that the financial reward is going to come quickly, or that, you know, the challenges that you're going to have to work through are not going to be quickly resolved. So, you know, really looking at the impact and keeping that on the forefront was always what made the good days even better.
Yeah, and what do you know now that you
Yeah.
didn't know? Like when because I know for me, you know, I was running sales, and a lot of salespeople are like this. We think we're generating all the revenue for this company. This is easy. I should be owning this company. So, what do you think? What do you know now that you've taken the plunge that you didn't know while you were observing, working for someone else?
Yeah. Well, and, you know, this may seem like an obvious answer, but I think to your point, you know, most entrepreneurs are very driven and very capable, and capable of a lot. You know, I think about, you know, some of the entrepreneurs that inspire me, and it's like, you know, wow, these people accomplish more by 9 a.m. than most people accomplish all day. So, you know, I think that drive and that motivation is really intrinsic in a lot of entrepreneurs. And, you know, it may seem obvious, but the biggest thing that I think is impossible to replicate is the capabilities of the team that you're building. And I think that's impossible to know as an entrepreneur going in, and that is one of the big risk factors that you're taking, right? I mean, if you come from a career in sales or business development, you do kind of chart your own path, and, you know, you're the setter of your own destiny, if you will. But when you create your own company, you know, the second that you start hiring people, a lot of that responsibility starts to become out of your hands. So the creation of that team, you know, the responsibility of that team, you know, all of that. Again, it may sound obvious when you know, you kind of think about it, and everybody says, oh, the team is the most important, the team will make or break you. But I think for me, you know, kind of growing up in business here in Richmond, I was always fortunate to be a part of amazing teams. And you know, when you go out to create your own business, you know, you don't have a CFO to rely on, you don't have a head of HR to rely on, you don't have somebody in charge of operations. And so for me, that was definitely the hardest part. And, you know, eventually I was able to, you know, figure out good mentors and good consultants and, you know, all of that. But that was certainly the hardest part. And not to jump ahead too much, but that is what intrigued me to make the move to Lighthouse. You know, my own experience in being a solo entrepreneur, you know, I don't have a business partner. I don't have equity investors. You know, so in a lot of senses, it was just me, and that team became really, really critical as time went on.
Great, thank you. So you talked about your team a lot. How did you find the people? Yeah, how did you find the people to trust, that you could trust at Ginger Juice? You talked about, you know, how you had to build your brand first. Can you take us, that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for a brand like Ginger Juice, you know, or any consumer-facing brand, you know, there were a lot of synergies between the people that wanted to work for us that were also customers of ours. And, you know, I really accredit a lot of our success with some of the people that I've been able to bring on board, to being able to correlate that passion. And so I think with a consumer-facing business, it's probably a little easier than maybe a B2B business, you know, to be able to recruit people that are passionate about your brand. And so that's always the leg up that we've had when it comes to hiring. You know, of course, I only have one salaried employee. The rest of my employees are hourly. So the fact that they are passionate about what we're doing, that they're knowledgeable about what we're doing, you know, we've had the fortune of the health and wellness groundswell being on our side. So I didn't have to really educate the market about, you know, why it's good to put good food into your body. That was already a groundswell that was happening. And so for Ginger Juice, that really helped to create our brand, and also helped when it came to hiring. So, you know, of course, we couldn't compete with somebody that was, you know, serving at a really high-end restaurant or bartending from a salary perspective. But where we could compete was finding people that were really passionate about health and wellness, and that was part of their fiber, and they really wanted to be able to serve that community. So, you know, especially early on, having people that shared that passion was really critical.
And then when you and I were talking, you talked about how you built your brand and some of the things you had to start doing, and then knowing your worth as an entrepreneur and how that kind of shifted as your business grew.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, we were fortunate in the sense that, you know, we were the first cold pressed juice company to start up in Richmond, and our initial clients were people that had had cold pressed juice in other cities, you know, New York, Miami, LA. And so they would come into the shop, and they were our biggest evangelists from the beginning. And so at the beginning, I said yes to everything, you know, every pop-up, every, you know, Earth Day festival, every, you know, school event, you know, literally everything that we were invited to. And that really helped to build our brand because we showed up, you know, in all of those different settings. And we did that consistently. The farmers market was another one that we did consistently. And at the beginning, you know, even doing the pop-ups at Short Pump Mall and down at the canal, none of those were profitable ventures for us. They were more so building our brand equity, you know, and building our relationships in the community, because of course that was so incredibly important. And so it wasn't until a little later down the road, you know, 3 or 4 years later, when people were coming to us saying, hey, can you pop up at our grand opening event for our yoga studio, for example? And those were all partnerships that were curated, you know, years in the making. But eventually I was able to say, yeah, sure, we can pop up at that, and here's the cost for that. We'll bring X number of samples, we'll bring, certified nutritionists to talk about our product. And this is our package that we offer for that. So eventually those were able to become more profitable ventures for us, but certainly at the beginning, developing those relationships in the community were just critical. And, that is paying off in dividends now. I mean, I am incredibly honored by the brand recognition that Ginger Juice has. And, it's because of a lot of that work that we did at the beginning to develop and curate those partnerships. And that is not unlike Lighthouse. Todd Knuckles has done an incredible job of curating those community relationships and partnerships. This wouldn't be happening today if he hadn't have done that in the past. So, certainly those partnerships and community relationships were critical and are always critical of brands early on. And, it's not really something that ever ends, especially in a community like Richmond, where, it's just critical.
Yeah, that's where I first saw you. I told you at Hot Yoga Bar, y'all showed up, and that's when you were giving out some juice. And then I won that little gift card for working. Yes. So exactly.
That's for sure.
Yeah. Our last question before we move on to a little bit about Lighthouse Labs and how people can get involved in that. From your experience, what are the top 3 critical success factors, in owning your own business?
Yeah, gosh, absolutely. All of us are in this situation right now that is incredibly unknown. But I think being comfortable with the unknown is the first and foremost critical factor for success. And, thinking back to, times of uncertainty, in your career, if you're thinking about owning a business, because literally every day owning your own business is uncertain, especially at the beginning. And being comfortable in that uncertainty, I think, is one of the big factors, because it's easy to get panicked or make irrational decisions when you're in uncomfortable situations. And as a business owner, those are the situations that you encounter every single day. So figuring out how to be comfortable in the uncertainty is a key contributor to success for sure. The second one that I'll mention, and this is somewhat counterintuitive to some of the advice that's out there, but something that I really learned at Ginger Juice and at Snagajob especially, is that as a business owner, you have to know your customer, but you also have to know that the customer isn't always right. And, that is something that I think was really hard for me to learn at Ginger Juice, especially because I didn't have a restaurant background and almost had a complex about it, right? Customers would come in, especially like I mentioned, those early customers, they had juice in New York or Miami or LA, and they would come in and say, oh, I had this recipe, in Miami, and it was this, matcha almond milk thing. And, or, oh, in New York, they had this fresh pressed, wheatgrass, and, we would get our fresh pressed wheatgrass shots. And so in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, the customer is right. Like, I have to do that. So let me come up with this matcha infused thing. Let me come up with this wheatgrass shot. The same thing happened at Snagajob. We would sort of chase some of these shiny pennies and say, oh, well, the customer is saying this, or the industry is going in this way. Maybe we should pivot. And, that is challenging, especially for businesses early on. And, I'll go back to the wheatgrass example at Ginger Juice. I bought this specific wheatgrass juicer, and I didn't cost any of it out. I bought the juicer, I bought the tray of organic wheatgrass, and I get it all. I paid $19 for a tray of wheatgrass, and I go to put it through the juicer, and it yielded me one shot. That I was selling for $2. So, obviously that was not a profitable menu item. And, I did that the first couple of months at Ginger Juice. People would come in and say, oh, I had this amazing fill in the blank, and I would just start making it because, oh, well, so-and-so said they would buy this. And it wasn't until I sat down and did a cross-section analysis of my menu, and I said, what are the most popular items? What are people buying? How much does it cost me to make each of these things? And how easy or difficult is it for me to execute on this item? And it wasn't until I did that I really was able to get things humming, and to start to see the fruits of my labor, to start to see the business be profitable. And as a young business, it is really hard to say no to things. And that was certainly, I think, the biggest lesson, both at Snagajob and at Ginger Juice, that I would encourage entrepreneurs to be disciplined about. And it's a balance, right? You can't say no at the beginning. You have to say yes to everything. So figuring out that inflection point of where you say, okay, how am I going to take these learnings and understand them, right? Because you should never stop talking to your customer. But how do you differentiate between making changes to the business or the business model versus understanding and hearing the feedback from your customers? So I would say that was the second lesson, that once I learned that and was able to turn that switch, that was when I really saw the business, be more effective. And then the third lesson, I think, especially early on, is that, your role as the founder and the CEO in the beginning is really to make things happen and, to keep pushing things forward. And I learned early on, people asked me all the time, and I think this came a lot from being a single mom. People would always say, Erin, how do you do it all? And my answer was pretty simple. It was, I don't do it all. When people ask me how they can help, it's my job to give them something to do. And, I really started to take that seriously when I was juggling being a single mom, working at Snagajob, having a business. I couldn't do it all. And especially early on, people would ask, hey, what can I do to help? And I think, as an entrepreneur, we tend to take on way too much. And I really started to embrace the power of delegation. And I started keeping a to delegate list instead of a to-do list. And, my goal was to really delegate all of the tasks that were on my plate. And sometimes it would surprise people. Like, I remember a friend called me one day and was like, hey, I see that you started this business. It's so incredible. What can I do to help? And I literally had something that needed to be picked up from Home Depot that day. And I was like, hey, if you can go by and get this from Home Depot and bring it to me, that would be really helpful. And the person on the other end, it was like silent for a second, because I really don't think that they expected me to ask them to do something. But they did it, and, they graciously did it. So I think, especially early on, and really not losing that as your company grows, that responsibility of, when people ask what they can do to help, giving them a job. And that also helps with that brand building, right? When somebody feels like they've personally helped you with something in your business, they're going to be your evangelist. They're going to be the one that is singing your praises. So, I think those are definitely three key things that helped me be successful, figuring out how to thrive in the unknown, talking to your customers, but knowing that they aren't always right, and figuring out how to give people things to do when they ask you how they can help. Those were certainly three critical success factors for me early on.
Thank you. Yeah, some of that resonates with me. I mean, I'm by myself, so I don't have this team to throw it off to. I think for me, cash flow is huge, especially right now. And learning that, and as a salesperson, we naturally do this because we're highly commissioned. So we know that every month is not going to always be the same and steady. Just having a lot of savings for rainy days like today when it might slow down. I think that's something, and you hear that in business school too. That's the first thing they say. But for me, that really has been important. And then, like you said about your clients. So when I worked for someone else, I was always spending his money. I was like, hey, we need this, we need this.
Yeah.
And when I started to have to manage the cost and it came out of my pocket, that was a lot different. You did have to do more of an analysis. You know, it's kind of like you have to spend money to make money, which is true. At the same time, it's still hard to do sometimes when, you know, it's your money.
Well, it's not always tangible things. I mean, you know, for a business like Ginger Juice, you know, I envision my inventory as $20 bills sitting in my refrigerator. So managing that is just as important as managing the cash flow in the bank. You know, so thinking about those, you know, non-tangible dollar amount items is really important too.
Exactly. All right. Well, let's talk about Lighthouse Labs.
Yeah.
I think you've got some great programs coming up. If anybody out there is looking to possibly get into entrepreneurship or start this business, you know, this is a great way to do it. Tell us, first of all, what is Lighthouse Labs and how is it different than other accelerators?
Yeah, so Lighthouse Labs is the only nationally ranked accelerator in the state. So there are over 1,000 accelerators globally, and Lighthouse Labs is ranked in the top 25 nationally. And we get that ranking really because of the connections that we're able to make for founders to mentors that really make an impact on their business and connections to capital in our region. So you know, we really pride ourselves on the quality of the programming and the quality of those connections. And we're looking for high growth technology companies that we can really make an impact with. And those are early stage companies that are, you know, looking for seed round funding or early stage funding.
Okay, great. Now you have a couple programs. I think right now you have one, probably a little late for that one. But there's one in the fall that's for technology-driven companies, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So an accelerator, you know, it's really just like what it sounds. We take 12 weeks to accelerate the growth of your business, and it's highly curated, highly individualized. This is not, you know, a scenario where you're going to be off working on somebody else's plan. You know, you're going to be accelerating your business forward. And so in the fall, we are going to be running 2 tracks. So one track is for industry agnostic, high growth technology companies, and the other track is for health related technology companies. And we're partnering with the Health Innovation Consortium through VCU. And so we are excited that we have a number of mentors and advisors in, you know, not only our community, but the health community that HIC is bringing alongside. So this is the first time that Lighthouse has really partnered with an outside group to help run a program like this in tandem. So we will accept somewhere between 6 and 8 companies into the program that will run August through November. And as part of those companies' commitment, we will invest $20,000 in non-diluted, non-equity seed funding for those companies. So we're really, really excited about that. To your point, we have a summer program that's well on its way that will get started in mid-June. So we'll quickly pivot after that program to be able to offer our fall program.
And who should apply? Like, what are you looking for in companies?
Yeah, so, you know, going back to the conversation earlier about teams, we're really looking for highly capable teams. You know, that's really what we look for. That's kind of the secret sauce in what makes, you know, Lighthouse Lab companies successful is their ability to take the information that we're giving them, apply it to their company, and really accelerate their business. So, we're not limited to Richmond-based companies. It can be companies within our region or outside of our region. And again, just great technology ideas, that our team feels like will be able to make an impact. Coincidentally, we've had a number of health technology related groups that have gone through Lighthouse. Kamana is a great success story that went through our program last fall. They are matching nurses with hospital staffing needs. So a very timely, need for that company. Round Trip is another one that has gone through our program that has been very successful, providing non-medical transportation. Obviously another company that's, been able to really make an impact during this time. So, like I said, health-related, high-growth tech companies, but also non-health related because we'll be running that dual track.
All right, great. Well, does anybody out there, or is there also opportunities for mentorship? Because we have a lot of people in the technology industry that may be on here that own their own companies already, or that have some great skills they can, share. So yeah, what kind of mentors do you look for, and how do people like that get involved?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. So we have an incredible database of mentors, and, certainly are always looking for others that, can bring industry expertise into the fold. And we do an event called Mentor Madness as part of our programming. And during that event, it's kind of like speed dating between the founder and the mentor. And so they're able to have kind of a natural pairing based on the synergies between the mentor and the founder. I think the Richmond community is just so fortunate, A, to have so many people that have had experience building and growing companies, and B, people that are willing to give back their time. Even some of our new founders are coming back and, providing mentorship to companies that are in cohort. Certainly if there are folks out there that are interested in getting involved in mentoring, we would love to hear from you too.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, those are all my questions, and I appreciate your responses. Does anybody else want to say anything? Have a comment? Want to ask a question, either by popping on here live or going through the chat box? Just going to give it a second to see. Hey, Nick.
Hey, Lori. I was actually going to chime in if it's okay for once.
That's perfect. Love it.
So, Erin, since you and I haven't really had a chance to meet deeply yet, but so this is kind of a nice overview of everything that you've done, and I thought it was fascinating. But I was curious about your personal journey, and there are a lot of entrepreneur inspiration stories out there, and I was curious if somebody in particular inspired you, or if you looked to somebody else, like a Sarah Blakely, for instance, in terms of like motivating you to get going and to start your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, there's so many. And, I think sometimes, some of the podcasts end up being like your only saving grace sometimes when you're like, okay, where do I go? Who do I talk to? Certainly how I built this podcast, hearing people's stories, because in entrepreneurship, the unthinkable happens, and it happens on a daily basis. And so, certainly people like Sarah Blakely, and even locally, people like Sean Boyer at Snagajob, people like Shane Emmett with Health Warrior. There are just so many people that I've kind of had on speed dial or speed text over the years to be able to reach out to, and I've been really thankful and fortunate for that. I think most recently I read Phil Knight's story, Shoe Dog. If you haven't read that, the Nike story, it's incredible. And I think it really just speaks to the fact that, even when you think you've made it, really, there were numerous times through that story at Nike where, they almost lost everything. So, I think staying true and, continually carving out time to have those conversations or think about those inspirations is critical as an entrepreneur.
All right. Anybody else have any questions? I see somebody else turn their their video on.
Yep. Hi, Erin. Steve Parker here.
Hi, Steve.
I'm one of your mentors at Lighthouse, and just a philosophical question that goes back to the beginning with Todd. It's always been scalable technology companies, and I'm wondering to what extent is there room, maybe not in the fall group that's coming up here because that's already defined, but for companies even like Ginger Juice, your past proof of concept, it certainly is a scalable business. That's kind of the whole point of franchising.
Yeah.
But that seems to be, whether consumer or business to business facing, it seems to be a little bit outside of the typical mission or philosophy for Lighthouse. And I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, I think, for an organization like Lighthouse, and kind of going back to being really focused, I do think that it's important for us to maintain a focus. One of the things that is interesting around acceleration, and really we're kind of plopped right in the midst of this right now with everything going on with COVID, is that prior to COVID, 17% of all accelerators were conducted virtually. And I think that offers a tremendous opportunity for our ecosystem as a whole to be able to expand what we're able to offer. And so I think looking forward, one of the things that Lighthouse does really well is, all is involved around those in-person connections, right? Whether it be an in-person connection with a mentor, with a potential investor. And so I think for us, for the traditional accelerator, that's not going to go away. But I think the big opportunity for growth in our ecosystem is with virtual acceleration. And I think we could open ourselves up to more companies. And we didn't mention it before in the interview, just so that we won't create confusion. But there are 2 programs that we're running this summer, the Startup Sprint and the Startup Intensive. And so what we did for the sprint is that we actually opened that up to 60 companies to be able to come in and get a 1-week, kind of overview of what Lighthouse is and what we can offer. And we have had non-traditional tech companies apply to that. So we have a brewery, for example, that is wanting to get started, that's going to be a part of it. And so registration for that sprint is open until this Friday, and we're cutting that off at 60 companies. Right now, as of this morning, we have 53 registered. So we do have a few more spots for the sprint. And again, not to confuse things, that's different from the fall. That's going to be our summer programming that we're running. The one requirement for those companies is that at least one of the co-founders has to be a graduate of a Virginia college or university. And that could be 2-year, 4-year, community, public, private, any Virginia college or university. And that link is live on our website through Friday. But Steve, you bring up an interesting point, and I think potentially through some of our virtual efforts, we might be able to reach more companies with our programming going forward, and I think that could be an exciting opportunity for us.
Thank you. Allison, did you pop on? Did you have a question? I don't want to put you on the spot.
I did, but I think she just answered it. So I have a company that I public facing launched in November. I had, incorporated it a year before that, because all the stuff you have to do before you can tell people it exists. And I have, I was never sure if it was a candidate for Lighthouse. And so I think you just answered my question that the week-long sprint would be a good place to start. So
we would love to have you.
No, thank you.
Yeah,
that's great. I'm glad you spoke up. That's awesome that somebody on here might want to do that sprint.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much work starting a company, and you see all these things about how there's programs to help you, and you're like, is that for me? Am I a candidate? You know, it's a little, sometimes it's hard to figure out where you fit in the ecosystem.
Yeah, and I know, our registration process is really long for our typical accelerator, and, it is highly selective. And part of that is because we're offering that seed funding, and, we can only accept a certain number of companies, given our budget. But what is awesome about this sprint, we've made the registration really short. So if you're available that week of June 15th, definitely come on, and it won't take you a long time to apply, because I know as an entrepreneur, time is precious too. So we only ask a few questions for that registration.
Okay, great. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Are there any other questions? I don't see anything in the chat box. Did anybody else want to come forward and ask anything? All right. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Erin. And thank y'all for being here.